Hey, so this week we're gonna talk a little bit about how uh, our identity process is, I guess, different from other trans folks given our API identity. Um, so our identity process are similar and different. The similar ways is that the process of figuring out and understanding our gender or genders is very different. It's confusing, it's scary, we don't know what to do in the beginning, we freak out, and then we come to terms with our identity, and then we move on and grow from it. So that's very similar. And the legal stuff that we have to go through, like name changing, medical transition, if you choose to medically transition, that's very similar. Um, getting your gender markers changed if you are looking into that kind of stuff. So those kind of stuff, it's very similar. That process is similar, but in very specific ways, our identity process are also very different because um, because we are API identified individuals. So for me personally, being a Southeast Asian trans person, um, I was brought up in a very collectivistic family, and I know collectivistic culture is thrown around as the stereotype of East Asian culture. But for me, that's pretty true for my family. So our family is very collectivistic. Our focus is around the family. We make sacrifices for the family. We don't bring attention to ourselves. We try not to bring shame upon our family. We do things for the family, and we keep our family close and together, and not just don't bring attention to ourselves. Um, so that was really interesting growing up, and that affected how I went through my identity process. And I know I talked a lot about that in previous videos, um, but just to reiterate how hard and different it was, um, because we didn't because I grew up in a culture where we don't bring attention to ourselves, we don't shame ourselves. Um, I struggle with not identifying as trans for a long time because I was afraid that if I identified as trans, if I identified any way other than a cultural norm, how does that affect my family? It's not that I think about it of how it affected me, it was how it affected my family. So I thought about, how is this gonna bring attention to our family? How is this gonna shame our family? Is there any repercussions of me identifying this way? Repercussions on my family. So that was really hard. It was quite a struggle for me to come to terms with that part of my identity process. And family is very important to me, and I worry about my family a lot. Even now, I worry about them constantly. But in the beginning of my process, that's all I could think about was, how is my family going to be affected by this? And because my parents are first generation Vietnamese Americans, I from what I can observe, the Vietnamese community in my city is very important to them. It is their community, is their social system, it is their support network. They need this community, and for people in my generation, and the younger generations, we become acculturated and in a way assimilated into society where we have support systems and social networks outside of our Asian community. And so we don't rely as much on the Vietnamese community as our parents. At least that's what I observe in my own city. So we have community outside of our Asian community. They don't always have that luxury. They don't always have that um, other support system to turn to. So I think about how is my trans identity going to affect them and how the Vietnamese community view them. Is the Vietnamese community going to be as accepting of my family after they find out? Or are they going to shame them and excommunicate them from the community? I don't know. So that scares me a lot. And that I have yet to figure out how that's going to play out because I'm not out to the community yet. So we'll see how that goes. But so that right now, that's my constant fear, and even in this part of my identity process and my trans identity, I still worry about family a lot. Um, and another part that's, I don't know if it's very different, but I noticed this for my family. When viewing my parents, comparing them to non-API parents of trans folks, that my family doesn't talk about trans stuff, even though I'm out to them and they claim that they're very supportive, and I believe that they're very supportive, but they don't talk about it. They don't ask for, for me to educate them anymore. They don't talk about it amongst each other. They kind of just accept it and run with it. Just don't bring much attention to it. So there's not a lot of advocacy for me from my parents as of right now, and I don't know if they're ready for it yet, or if it's a cultural thing. So I'm still kind of trying to figure out how that works. But my family just doesn't talk about this stuff at all right now. Um, so kind of so my identity process is it's very personal to me. Like, while the identity process is supposed to be very personal, it's about you. It's about you as a person, in your truest, authentic self. Um, when you're trying to figure out your identity process, and it's very personal for me too. And at the same time, while it's very personal, it's also very family oriented, just because of how I was raised and my mentality and how I navigate the world. It's surrounded by thoughts of family, how it affects my family. I think the biggest difference between uh, API trans folks and trans folks who aren't API. I think the biggest difference is the language barrier between us and our family, and our families, our parents, the older generations, the community. The language barrier, especially with the Vietnamese and other Southeast Asian communities, where we're very newly arrived immigrants. So the first generation isn't as acculturated and assimilated as, say, other Asian ethnicities who may or may not have been here for generations and understand the language a little bit better. My parents are first generation. They've only been here for a few decades. The language barrier is still there. They don't understand a lot of what I try to explain to them. So they have no concept of gender other than societal gender role norms that they grew up with. They don't have any other concept outside of that. And they have never really heard of the term gender, transgender, in the way that we know it. And my mom, she kind of understands what that means, but she doesn't. She didn't know that transgender people existed in the U.S. So it's just that kind of cultural gap, that language barrier, that gap in understanding of what transgender means and what transgender mean to each of us, and why it's so different for each person, how it's very individualized. They don't really understand it. They like to understand it in a very holistic way, if they even understand it that far, and I guess I need to give my parents a little bit more credit because I was very surprised that my mom even heard of the word transgender. I tried to explain to a family friend of ours what I do with my research, and I threw out the word transgender, and their face was just completely lost. Like they've never ever heard of this word before. So it's very interesting on how I have to explain what this means. And and for people who aren't API and who aren't, first and generation Americans, they don't encounter this stuff as much as first and second generation Americans do. So that was very difficult for me, and that's still a big part of what I have to go through. Um, and this video is already pretty long, so I'm gonna just quickly talk about finding our own community. Because of our unique cultural background and how we were raised up and how this affects our own identity process, we really strive to find a community of our own, people who understand where we're coming from, understand how family affects our identity process and how much of a struggle that can be, and not everyone understands that, and so finding a community of our own is very very difficult. And for me, from the South, I live in Kentucky. This area is predominantly white. For the longest time, the ethnicities that you can check on, like surveys and stuff, is white, black, and other. So for so it's really hard to find a community in this area for me. So to find another person who understands where I'm coming from, who understands my Asian background, who understands my trans background, and understand how these two intersect and affect one another, it's really hard. And I think that's why I really wanted to start this channel up, is to create that community, to make it easier for people to find and have their own community without, struggling for so long without it like I did. So I think that's pretty much what I want to say about this topic. I'm pretty sure I'm missing a lot. I always think I'm missing a lot. I like to talk about this. I like to really dig deep into it. But I'm already at the 13-minute mark, and so I think I'm going to shut up now. So it's New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's Eve if you celebrate that kind of stuff. If not, have a fabulous day. Have a fabulous week. Have a fabulous next week, and I will see you in 2 weeks. All right. Stay safe, guys. Bye.